Agnes. Okay. We live in a society where the media strongly influences what we wear, how we act, what we eat, who our friends are, the difference between the person we choose to be and the person we choose to portray to the world. Media has the power to program our emotions, such as how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about others, our actions, our state of mind or attitude when we execute those actions. Research undoubtedly shows that violent video games have the power to psychologically impact human thought and behavior. Today I'm going to prove the proposition that violent video games negatively affect society, which I will do by showing you with 3 claims. My first claim, violent video games negatively affects society psychologically. Violent video games encourage sexism towards women by male adults. And thirdly, violent video games negatively affect a student's academic performance. In order to prove my first secondary claim that violent video games negatively affects society psychologically, I will show you by presenting my first subclaim, which is violent video games leads to aggression and aggressive behavior. In March of 2013, Professor Youssef Hassan of the University of Pierre-Mendès in France did a research study where he took 70 participants and had them play 20 minutes of a video game, a violent video game and a non-violent video game for 3 days. After the gameplay, the participants were allowed to blast a Confederate with loud noise through headphones during a reaction time. How intense and how long each participant blasted the Confederate measured aggression. As a result, the ones who played the violent video game showed signs of lowered cardiac coherence. A side note, cardiac coherence is how your heart's ability is synchronized in harmony and shows low levels of stress. And so the result was they had lowered cardiac coherence and an increase in levels of aggression, which this showed that they had induced stress from the video game. Another example is a psychological study orchestrated at the University of Toronto, where they took a sample of 492 children aged from 10 to 17 and their parents, and were asked to complete an online survey for their children's bullying behaviors and 3 of their favorite video games. Reports from both parents and children who played these violent and mature games showed that the children were more likely to engage in bullying or cyberbullying their friends. Okay, my second claim to prove that violent video games negatively affect society psychologically is that violent video games desensitizes a person's moral judgment. Okay. Professor Alessandro Gabbiadini of the University of Milano recruited 385 high school students to study their moral disengagement after playing Grand Theft Auto 4. The results showed exposure to the game predicted high levels of moral disengagement. Another study done at the University of Inbeck with Dr. Grietmeyer, where players found it easier to kill other people when they perceived the victim as being less than human. My third subclaim is violent video games are responsible for sleep problems. A research study at the Seattle Children's Research Institute took children from age 3 to 5 to measure their sleep habits for children's sleep habit questionnaire. Of those who played the violent video games, it showed that were coded for violence ratings and scariness and pacing. It showed that 74.3% of the children had increased sleeping problems. Okay, my secondary claim is that violent video games encourage sexism towards women by male adults. And my first subclaim to prove that is aggressive language in violent video games encourage sexism in the male-dominant gaming world. In 2012, the New York Times ran an article on sexual harassment called "Sex Harassment is All Too Real." In the article, Amy O'Leary exposes how women gamers are shunned from the male gaming world with aggressive threats and abuse. O'Leary follows the story of an experienced woman gamer named Miranda Pakozdi, who participated in the Cross Assault video game tournament. Being the only girl on her team, Pakozdi had to endure interrogation from her team's coach where she was patronized and told to take off her shirt, and the camera was focused on her chest, feet, and legs. My third and final claim is that violent video games negatively affect a student's academic performance. According to Dr. Douglas of Iowa State's research, exposure to violent video games and aggressive thoughts, aggressive behavior, and angry feelings among players who may become more likely to engage in hostile interactions with peers and authority figures, such as teachers, which would result in lower attendance, increased suspensions, and poor interactions with peers and teachers. And also, Professor Hastings E.C. from the psychological department of the University of Florida conducted a study that looked at the impact of video game use in relation to academic studies with kids aged 6 to 10 years old. And he found that where the amount of time playing video games and exposure to violence in video games are associated with lower school performance, increased aggression, attention problems, and externalized performance. In conclusion, today I proved to you guys that violent video games negatively affect society.
There's a reason why there's ratings. And there's a reason why when you go to like games like
Agnes, you get the copy for me?
Are you really getting card games? Right?
All right, you start off really well with a very clear statement of the proposition. It's definitely controversial. I think that you clearly state what the secondary claims are going to be, and they're all phrased appropriately also, so I thought that that worked pretty well. In the body of the speech, though, the organizational structure got a little bit confusing because, especially the first 2 points, it sounds like you got point 1 and then 1, 2, and 3 under 1, which is, like I said, a little. You probably don't want the second numbering system. There's got to be some other way that you express those. Because I thought that you were on your fourth point when you're actually on your second point, and that's just because of the numbering system. So you've got to simplify the way you make the second or the minor claims under your main supporting points so that it's a little bit less confusing. The explanations on all those points are okay. You've got a lot of information. I've got at least 7 or 8 studies that you cited in the presentation, which is a good thing because that means that there is obviously a lot of research to the point. What I need is some information that shows that those studies are applicable to real-world scenarios and that we have some outcome, that we know that people get aggressive, for instance, in playing a video game, and that they might have that attitude during the gameplay. I'm not sure there's a huge amount of controversy on that, but is it ongoing? Do they subsequently behave that way, have those same attitudes? You mentioned the sexism at one point, and that there might be sexism in the games themselves or in the way that the competitions go on. I think you've got a little bit of information on that. I think that still could have been a little stronger. I'm not sure exactly why the one example you cited is enough to generalize from, but it does kind of certainly suggest a negative environment that's going on there. But do people then outside of the environment reflect that same sort of attitude? Because that seems to be the argument that you're making, that it's stuff that comes from this environment of the gamers that is going to have a negative consequence on society, as opposed to this is just the way the game is played and this is the way people behave in this particular circumstance. You got to do more than just describe what happens there. You're trying to make an inference, and I think that the inferences needed a little bit more generalizable information. Like I said, I thought that you provided very good support, excellent citation of the studies that you gave us. Your presentation, I think, is a little problematic. There's a lot of reading that's going on there. And part of that is because you've got so many studies, but part of it is, I think, that you are rushing through this and you're trying to get it done as much. You maybe need to do a little key editing and some additional practice. And a pretty solid summary there. Thank you. I'm not sure if that's for you or me. You know?